Jake Martinez pulled his blue Honda into the driveway of his new house and turned off the engine. He sat there for a moment, looking at the small white house with green shutters that would now be home for him, his wife Lisa, and their twin daughters, Emma and Sophie. After 5 years of living in a cramped apartment, they finally had their own place with a real yard. The house was not big, but it was perfect for their family. It had 2 bedrooms upstairs for the girls, a small kitchen that Lisa had already filled with her colorful dishes, and best of all, a backyard where the twins could play safely. Jake had big plans for that backyard. He wanted to build a swing set and maybe plant a vegetable garden. Lisa came out of the front door carrying a box of books. Her long brown hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she had paint on her old t-shirt from working on the girls' bedroom all morning. "The moving truck guys left this box in the wrong room," she said, setting it down on the porch steps. "How does it feel to be a real homeowner?" Jake got out of the car and stretched his arms above his head. "It feels good, really good. No more listening to the neighbors upstairs stomping around at midnight." Emma and Sophie came running around from the backyard, their blonde pigtails bouncing as they ran. They were 8 years old and looked exactly alike except for a tiny scar on Emma's chin from when she fell off her bike last year. Dad," Sophie called out. "The backyard is huge. Can we get a dog now? Can we plant flowers?" Emma added, "I want to plant purple ones." Jake laughed and picked up both girls, one in each arm. "Maybe we can do both. But first, we need to get the house all set up." The family spent the rest of Saturday unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. Jake made several trips to the hardware store to buy things they needed for the house. Each time he drove through the neighborhood, he noticed how neat and clean everything looked. All the houses had perfect green lawns, trimmed bushes, and matching mailboxes. It looked like something from a magazine. On Sunday morning, Jake decided to start working on the front yard. He had bought some bright yellow and orange flowers called marigolds because they were cheap and easy to grow. He also bought a small shovel and some plant food. The sun was shining, and it was a perfect day for gardening. Jake dug small holes along the front edge of his lawn and carefully planted each flower. The marigolds looked cheerful and bright against the green grass. He was proud of his work. Lisa brought him a glass of cold water and stood next to him, admiring the flowers. "They look beautiful, Jake, much better than that empty dirt patch that was there before. I was thinking we could add some more plants next weekend," Jake said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Maybe some small bushes along the side of the house." The girls were playing in the backyard with their dolls, and Jake could hear them laughing and talking to each other. This was exactly what he had wanted when they decided to buy a house. A place where his family could be happy and safe. Monday morning came too quickly. Jake had to go back to work at the office supply company where he was a manager. He got dressed in his khaki pants and blue shirt, grabbed his coffee and lunch, and headed out to his car lot as he was putting his briefcase. In the back seat, he heard a woman's voice calling from across the street. "Excuse me, you there with the blue Honda?" Jake looked up and saw a woman walking toward him with quick, determined steps. She looked to be about 50 years old, with short blonde hair that was styled perfectly. She wore a white blouse and dark blue pants that looked expensive. In her hands, she carried a clipboard and a pen. The woman had a smile on her face, but something about it made Jake feel uncomfortable. It was the kind of smile people used when they were about to tell you something you did not want to hear. "Hello," Jake said politely. "Can I help you?" A woman walked right up to him and stuck out her hand. "I am Carol Peterson, and I am the president of the Maple Grove Homeowners Association. I wanted to welcome you to our wonderful neighborhood." Jake shook her hand. "Nice to meet you, Carol. I am Jake Martinez." My family and I just moved in on Saturday. Carol's smile got a little tighter. Yes, I noticed. I make it my business to know everything that happens in this neighborhood. We work very hard to keep Maple Grove looking beautiful and maintaining our property values. That is great, Jake said. It really is a nice neighborhood. Everyone keeps their houses looking so good. Well, that brings me to why I wanted to talk to you, Carol said, looking down at her clipboard. I could not help but notice the landscaping work you did yesterday. Those orange and yellow flowers you planted in your front yard. Jake felt confused. The marigolds? What about them? Carol flipped through some papers on her clipboard and pulled out a thick booklet. According to the Maple Grove Homeowners Association, rules and regulations. All landscaping changes must be approved by the HOA board before any work begins. You should have received this packet when you bought your house. Jake took the booklet from her. It was at least 50 pages long and had tiny print that was hard to read. I think I remember getting this, but I have not had time to read through it yet. We just moved in 2 days ago. I understand that moving is stressful, Carol said, but her voice did not sound understanding at all. However, ignorance of the rules is not an excuse for breaking them. Page 47 clearly lists the approved flowers for front yard landscaping. Marigolds are not on that list. Jake opened the booklet and tried to find page 47, but the pages were not numbered clearly. I am sorry. I did not know there were rules about what flowers I could plant. They are just marigolds. Rules are rules, Mr. Martinez, Carol said firmly. The approved flowers are listed there in alphabetical order. You will find petunias, impatiens, and begonias are acceptable choices. Marigolds are considered too bright and do not fit with our neighborhood's color scheme. Jake looked back at his house where the cheerful yellow and orange flowers were blooming in the morning sun. They looked perfectly normal to him. So what do I need to do? Carol made a note on her clipboard. You will need to remove the marigolds and replant with approved flowers within 7 days. If you fail to comply, you will receive a fine of $50. $50? Jake could not believe what he was hearing. For planting flowers in my own yard? It is not just your yard, Mr. Martinez, Carol said coldly. When you bought this house, you agreed to follow the HOA rules. This neighborhood has standards, and we expect all residents to maintain them. Jake felt his face getting hot, but he tried to stay calm. Okay, I will take care of it. Is there anything else? Carol looked at his lawn carefully, then made another note on her clipboard. Your grass is too long. HOA regulations require grass to be maintained at exactly 2.5 inches. Yours appears to be closer to 3 inches. Jake looked down at his lawn. It looked like every other lawn on the street. I will cut it this weekend. It needs to be done by Wednesday, Carl said. I will be back to check on both issues. Welcome to Maple Grove, Mr. Martinez. I am sure you will learn to appreciate our community standards. With that, Carol turned and walked back across the street to her own house, which Jake now noticed was the biggest one on the block with a perfectly manicured lawn, and not a single flower out of place. Jake stood in his driveway, holding the thick rule book and feeling like he had just been hit by a truck. All he had wanted to do was plant some flowers to make his new house look nice. Now he was being treated like a criminal. He got in his car and drove to work. But he could not stop thinking about Carol Peterson and her clipboard. Something told him this was just the beginning of his problems with the Maple Grove Homeowners Association. Jake spent his lunch break at the garden center buying new flowers. The man working there looked confused when Jake explained he needed to replace perfectly healthy marigolds with petunias because of HOA rules. That is the strangest thing I have ever heard, the worker said, shaking his head. Marigolds are great flowers. They keep bugs away and bloom all summer long. Jake agreed, but he did not want to pay a $50 fine on top of buying new. Flowers. He loaded his car with white and pink petunias and drove home during his lunch break to replant his front yard. Lisa was not happy when she heard about Carol Peterson and the flower rules. "This is ridiculous, Jake. We own this house. We should be able to plant whatever flowers we want." "I know, but I do not want to start a fight with the neighbors," Jake said as he dug up the beautiful marigolds. "Maybe if we follow the rules, she will leave us alone." Jake was wrong about that dot the next morning. Carol appeared at his front door at 7:30 while Jake was getting ready for work. She rang the doorbell 3 times in a row, which woke up the twins. "Mr. Martinez," Carol said when Jake opened the door. "I need to discuss your trash cans with you." Jake looked toward the street, where he had put out his garbage cans the night before, just like every other house on the block. "What about them?" Carol pulled out her clipboard and a small camera. HOA regulations state that trash cans must be removed from the curb within 4 hours of pickup. Garbage was collected at 6:15 this morning. It is now 7:30, which means your cans have been visible for 1 hour and 15 minutes longer than allowed. Jake rubbed his eyes. He had not even had his coffee yet. "I was getting ready for work. I was going to bring them in before I left." "The rule does not make exceptions for work schedules," Carol said, taking a picture of his trash cans. "I am issuing you a warning this time, but next week I will have to fine you if this happens again." Over the next 2 weeks, Carol found something wrong with Jake's property almost every day. She complained that his garden hose was not rolled up neatly. Enough. She said his mailbox flag was left up for too long after the mail was delivered. She even measured the height of his grass with a ruler to make sure it was exactly 2.5 inches. The worst incident happened on a Saturday morning when Jake was outside with Emma and Sophie. He was teaching them to ride their bicycles in the driveway. The girls were just learning, so they needed a lot of practice. Emma had finally managed to ride all the way from one end of the driveway to the other without falling. "I did it, Daddy," Emma shouted, her face glowing with pride. "Did you see me? I rode the whole way." "You did great, sweetheart," Jake said, giving her a big hug. "Sophie, do you want to try again?" Sophie was still nervous about riding without training wheels, but she was getting braver each time. Jake held onto the back of her bike seat and ran alongside her as she pedaled. "Let go, Daddy," Sophie called out. "I think I can do it." Jake let go for just a few seconds, and Sophie rode about 10 feet before getting scared and putting her feet down. "I almost did it," she said excitedly. "You are getting so much better," Jake told her. "A few more practice sessions, and you will be riding all by yourself." The family was having such a good time that they did not notice Carol Peterson walking up their driveway with her clipboard and measuring tape. "Mr. Martinez," Carol said in a loud voice that made both girls stop what they were doing. "These bicycles need to be put away immediately." Jake looked at her in confusion. "We are using them right now. The girls are learning to ride." Carol pulled out her clipboard and showed him a piece of paper. According to HOA Regulation 15.7, recreational vehicles, including bicycles, cannot be stored in driveways or other visible areas for more than 15 minutes at a time. Jake looked at his watch. "We have only been out here for 10 minutes. I have been watching from my window," Carol said. "You brought the bicycles out at 9:45. It is now 10:07. That is 22 minutes. Emma and Sophie moved closer to their father. They looked scared of the angry woman with the clipboard. "These are my children learning to ride their bikes in our own driveway," Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm. "This is not hurting anyone." "The rules do not make exceptions for children learning," Carol replied. Visible recreational equipment reduces property values and creates an untidy appearance. I am issuing you a citation for $50. 8-year-old. Emma looked up at Carol with tears in her eyes. Why are you being so mean to us? We are just playing. Carol's face turned red. I am not being mean, young lady. I am making sure this neighborhood stays nice and clean, so everyone's houses are worth more money. But we live here too, Sophie said quietly. Why can we not play in our own yard? Because there are rules that everyone has to follow, Carol snapped. Even children. Jake felt his anger rising, but he did not want to yell in front of his daughters. Carol, this is unreasonable. Children need to be able to play outside. They can play in the backyard where no one can see them, Carol said. The front yard and driveway are part of the neighborhood's appearance. Lisa had heard the commotion and came outside. When she saw her daughters looking upset and scared, she immediately put her arms around them. What is going on here? Lisa asked. Mrs. Peterson is saying we cannot ride our bikes in our own driveway, Emma said, wiping her nose with her sleeve. Lisa looked at Carol with the kind of look that could freeze fire. Are you seriously telling my children they cannot play in their own yard? I am enforcing the HOA regulations that your husband agreed to follow when he bought this house, Carol said. If you do not like the rules, perhaps you should have bought a house somewhere else. That evening, Jake found an email in his inbox with the $50 fine attached. The official violation notice said he had violated the Recreational Vehicle Storage Ordinance and had 7 days to pay the fine or face additional penalties. Lisa was furious when she read the email. Jake, this woman is crazy. She is harassing our family. No one should have this much control over what we do in our own yard. Jake agreed, but he felt trapped. I know it is unfair, but what can we do? She is the HOA president. Maybe if we just follow all the rules exactly, she will stop bothering us. She is not going to stop, Lisa said. People like her never stop. She is enjoying having power over us. Jake did not want to believe that, but deep down he knew Lisa was probably right. He had never met anyone like Carol Peterson before. She seemed to take pleasure in finding fault with everything they did. The next week brought more problems. Carol complained that Jake's car was parked 2 inches too far from the curb. She said the welcome mat in front of their door was not an approved color. She even measured the space between their fence posts to make sure they were exactly the right distance apart. Jake started to dread coming home from work because he never knew what new complaint would be waiting for him. The worst part was seeing how the constant harassment was affecting his family. Emma and Sophie were afraid to play outside because they did not want the mean lady to yell at them again. Something had to change, but Jake did not know what to do about it. Carol Peterson seemed to have all the power, and his family was suffering because of it. Jake could not sleep that night. He kept thinking about Carol Peterson and all her crazy rules. He also could not forget the scared look on his daughters' faces when Carl yelled at them for riding their bikes. Something was very wrong with this situation. The next morning, Jake called in sick to work. He told his boss he had a family emergency to deal with, which was not really a lie. He needed to figure out what was going on with the HOA rules. Jake spread all the HOA paperwork across his kitchen table. The rule book was huge, with tiny print that was hard to read. He made a pot of coffee and started reading every single page carefully. After 2 hours of reading, Jake made a surprising discovery. Many of the rules that Carol had told him about were not actually in the book. There was no rule about bicycles only being allowed in driveways for 15 minutes. There was no rule about garden hoses being rolled up in a specific way. There was no rule about mailbox flags being put down within a certain time limit. Jake read through the whole book twice to make sure he had not missed anything. The real rules were much simpler than what Carol had been telling him. The flower rule was real, but most of the other complaints she had made were completely made up. Jake felt angry and confused. Why would Carol lie about the rules? What was she trying to accomplish by harassing his family? He decided to talk to his neighbors to see if they had similar problems with Carol. Jake walked next door to the house on his left, where an older woman named Betty Johnson lived alone. Betty was about 80 years old and had been living in the neighborhood for many years. Betty answered the door, wearing a flower print dress and holding a cup of tea. She had kind eyes and white hair that was always perfectly styled. "Hello, Jake," Betty said with a warm smile. "How are you settling into the neighborhood?" "Actually, that is what I wanted to talk to you about," Jake said. "Have you had any problems with Carol Peterson and the HOA rules?" Betty's smile disappeared immediately. She looked around nervously and then invited Jake inside her house. "Oh my," Betty said, closing the door behind them. "You have no idea what that woman has put me through." Betty led Jake to her living room, which was decorated with photos of her late husband and beautiful flower arrangements. She offered him some tea and then sat down in her favorite chair. "Carol has been trying to make me remove my husband's memorial garden for over a year," Betty explained. "Harold died 3 years ago, and I planted a small rose garden in the backyard to remember him. It brings me so much comfort to tend to those roses." Jake looked out Betty's back window and saw a beautiful small garden with white and pink roses growing around a simple stone bench. "That looks lovely," Jake said. "What is Carol's problem with it?" "She says the roses are too tall and that memorial gardens are not allowed," Betty said, her voice shaking a little. "She comes by at least twice a week to measure the roses and threaten me with fines. Last month she made me so upset that I ended up in the hospital." Jake was shocked. "The hospital?" "My doctor said it was stress-related," Betty explained. "My blood pressure got so high from worrying about Carol's threats that I had chest pains. I thought I was having a heart attack." Jake felt terrible for his elderly neighbor. "Have you checked the HOA rules about memorial gardens?" "I tried to read that big book, but the print is so small, and my eyes are not what they used to be," Betty said. "Carol always has her clipboard and acts like she knows everything. I just assumed she was right about the rules." Jake pulled out his phone and showed Betty the photos he had taken of the relevant pages in the HOA book. "I read through the entire rule book this morning. There is no rule about memorial gardens being prohibited. There is also no height limit for rose bushes." Betty's eyes filled with tears. "You mean she has been lying to me this whole time?" "It looks that way," Jake said gently. "She has been making up rules to harass you, just like she has been doing to my family." After talking to Betty, Jake walked to the house on his right side. A man named Carlos Rivera lived there with his wife and teenage son. Carlos worked as a mechanic and always had grease under his fingernails, but he was one of the friendliest people Jake had ever met. Carlos was in his garage working on an old motorcycle when Jake knocked on the open door. "Hey, Jake," Carlos called out, wiping his hands on a rag. "How is the new house treating you?" "Actually, I wanted to ask you about Carol Peterson," Jake said. "Has she been giving you trouble about HOA violations?" Carlos laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. "Oh man, do not get me started on that woman. She has been trying to make me remove my son's basketball hoop for months." Jake looked at the basketball hoop attached to the garage. It looked exactly like the ones he had seen at several other houses in the neighborhood. "What is wrong with the basketball hoop?" Jake asked. "According to Carol, it is not regulation height," Carlos said. "She measured it and said it was 6 inches too tall. But here is the funny thing. There are 3 other basketball hoops on this same street that are exactly the same height as that. Mine. She never bothers those families about their hoops." "Which families?" Jake asked. "The Johnsons on Oak Street, the Millers on Pine Avenue, and the Whites on Elm Drive," Carlos said. "All their hoops are identical to mine, but Carol has never said a word to them." Jake thought about this information. "Do you know if those families have any connection to Carol?" "Well, Mr. Johnson is on the HOA board with Carol," Carlos said. "And Mrs. Miller is Carol's next-door neighbor. They are pretty good friends. I do not know about the Whites, but I think their son goes to school with Carol's nephew." This was very interesting information. It seemed like Carol was only enforcing rules against certain families, while ignoring violations by people she liked. Jake spent the rest of the day walking around the neighborhood and talking to other families. He discovered that at least 6 families had been harassed by Carol with fake or selectively enforced rules. All of these families were newer to the neighborhood or had something that made them different from Carol's inner circle. The Martinez family was new and had young children. Betty Johnson was a widow who kept to herself. Carlos Rivera worked with his hands and did not fit Carol's idea of the perfect neighbor. The Kim family had been fined for hanging their laundry outside to dry. The Thompson family had been cited for their dog barking, even though several other families had dogs that barked just as much. The pattern was clear. Carol was not really interested in enforcing HOA rules fairly. She was using her position to bully and harass people she did not like while protecting her friends and allies. Jake realized that he had 2 choices. He could keep trying to follow Carol's made-up rules and hope she would eventually leave his family alone. Or he could fight back and expose what she was really doing. When he thought about Emma and Sophie being afraid to play in their own yard, the choice became easy. Carol Peterson had picked the wrong family to mess with. That evening, Jake started making a plan. He was going to document everything Carol did and said he was going to prove that she was abusing her power and harassing innocent families. And he was going to make sure that everyone in the neighborhood knew the truth about their HOA president. Jake did not know it yet, but his plan was going to work better than he ever imagined. Jake spent the weekend preparing for his plan to catch Carol Peterson in the act. He bought a small security camera and installed it near his front door where he could record everything that happened in his yard. He also made sure his phone was always charged so he could record any conversations with Carol. Lisa thought Jake was being smart. "That woman has been lying to us from the beginning," she said. "It is time someone stood up to her." Jake also started keeping a notebook where he wrote down every time Carol came to his house and what she said. He wrote down the date, the time, and exactly what violation she claimed he had committed. Then he looked up each violation in the real HOA rule book to see if it was actually a rule. After 1 week of documenting everything, Jake had proof that Carol had made up 12 different violations. She had lied about his grass being too long, his trash cans being out too long, his garden hose not being neat enough, and many other things. But Jake needed more than just proof that Carol was lying to him. He needed to catch her being mean to someone else so that everyone could see what kind of person she really was. His chance came on a Tuesday morning in late September. Jake was working from home that day, sitting at his kitchen table with his laptop. Around 10 o'clock, he heard shouting coming from outside. Jake looked out his window and saw Carol Peterson standing in Betty Johnson's backyard, waving her clipboard in the air. Betty was kneeling next to her rose garden, and she looked very upset. Jake grabbed his phone and ran outside. As he got closer, he could hear what Carol was saying, and it made him very angry. "I do not care if these roses are for your dead husband," Carol was screaming at the elderly woman. "They are too tall, and they have to go." Betty was crying and trying to explain. "Please, Mrs. Peterson, this garden is all I have left of Harold. It makes me feel close to him." I do not care about your feelings, Corral shouted. These roses are 42 inches tall, and the maximum height is 36 inches. Jake started recording with his phone as he walked closer. Betty looked up and saw him coming, and her face showed relief that someone was there to help her. Carol, what is going on here? Jake asked in a calm voice, making sure to keep his phone steady. Carol spun around to face him. Her face was red with anger, and she was breathing hard. This is none of your business, Martinez. This woman refuses to follow the basic landscaping rules. What specific rule is she breaking? Jake asked, still recording. Carol waved her clipboard. At him. Rose bushes cannot be taller than 36 inches. It is right there in the HOA regulations. Jake pulled out his printed copy of the HOA rule book that he now carried with him everywhere. I have read the entire rule book 3 times, Carol. Can you show me exactly where that rule is written? Carol's face got even redder. I do not have. To explain HOA rules to someone who does not even know how to cut his grass properly. Actually, you do have to explain the rules, Jake said, keeping his voice calm and steady. Because I have read all 412 pages of our HOA documents, and there is no height limit for rose bush anywhere in the book. Betty stopped crying and looked up at Jake with hope in her eyes. There is no height limit? None. At all, Jake confirmed, still recording Carol's angry face. And there is definitely no rule against memorial gardens. In fact, the HOA documents encourage residents to create beautiful garden spaces. Carol was getting more and more angry. You think you know everything just because you read some book. It is not just some book, Carol, Jake said. It is the official HOA rule book that governs our entire neighborhood. And I also know that you have been making up fake rules to harass families you do not like. That is not true, Carol screamed. Really? Jake said. Then why have you never cited the Johnsons on Oak Street for their basketball hoop, which is the exact same height as Carlos Rivera's hoop? Why have you never told the Millers to put their trash cans away faster? Why do your friends get to break the same rules that you fine everyone else for? Carol realized that Jake knew about her selective enforcement of the rules. You do not know what you are talking about? I know that you told me bicycles could only be in driveways for 15 minutes, but that rule does not exist, Jake continued. I know that you said garden hoses have to be rolled up in a specific way, but that rule does not exist either. I know that you have been bullying an 82-year-old widow about a memorial garden that is completely legal according to our HOA rules. Betty was now standing up, and she looked stronger than Jake had ever seen her. You mean I can keep Harold's rose garden? Of course you can, Jake said. Carol has been lying to you. Carol was so angry that she was shaking. Give me that phone. You cannot record me. She lunged forward and tried to grab Jake's phone out of his hands. Jake stepped back quickly, but Carol kept coming at him. You cannot record me without my permission, Carol shouted, reaching for the phone again. Actually, I can, Jake said, holding the phone away from her. We are standing on a public sidewalk, and you are a public official acting in your official capacity as HOA president. I have every right to record this conversation. Carol was so mad that she threw her clipboard on the ground. This is harassment. No. Carol, Jake said firmly. What you have been doing to the families in this neighborhood is harassment. What I am doing is documenting the truth. Carol kicked Betty's fence with her foot, making a loud bang. I am going to have you thrown out of this neighborhood. For what? Jake asked. For reading the actual HOA rules? For standing up for my elderly neighbor? For refusing to let you bully my family? Carol did not have an answer for that. She picked up her clipboard from the ground and stormed toward Jake, pointing her finger at his face. This is not over, Martinez. She screamed. I will make your life miserable. You already tried that, Jake said. But now, everyone is going to see what kind of person you really are. Carol stomped away toward her house, muttering angry words under her breath. Jake kept recording until she was completely out of sight. Betty walked over to Jake with tears in her eyes, but this time they were happy tears. Thank you so much, Jake. I was so scared of her. I thought I was going to have to move away from my home. You never have to be scared of her again, Jake promised. And you can keep your beautiful rose garden for as long as you want. That evening, Jake watched the video he had recorded. It was 12 minutes long and showed everything that had happened. Carol's angry face, her lies about the rules, her attempt to grab his phone, and her final threat to make his life miserable. Jake knew that this video was going to change everything. He just did not know how much. He uploaded the video to his social media accounts with a simple message. This is what happens when HOA bullies attack elderly widows and get confronted with the truth. Within 1 hour, the video had been shared 50 times. Within 3 hours, it had been shared 500 times. By the time Jake went to bed that night, over 2,000 people had watched Carol Peterson lose her mind on camera. But that was just the beginning. Jake woke up the next morning to his phone buzzing with notifications. He had received over 300 messages, comments, and friend requests overnight. The video of Carol Peterson screaming at Betty Johnson had been shared thousands of times. While he was sleeping, Lisa sat up in bed and looked at Jake's phone screen. Oh my goodness, Jake, look at all these notifications. Jake opened his social media app and could not believe what he was seeing. The video now had over 50,000 views. People from all over the country were commenting and sharing their own stories about dealing with difficult HOA presidents. This HOA, Karen, is exactly like the one in my neighborhood, wrote one person. These people think they can control everyone. Poor elderly lady just wants to remember her husband, wrote another. This Carol woman is heartless. Good for you for standing up to this bully, commented someone else. More people need to do this. Jake got dressed quickly and went outside to get the newspaper. 3 of his neighbors were already waiting for him in his driveway. Carlos Rivera was there with a big smile on his face. Jake, man, you are famous. My wife saw your video on her Facebook page last night. Betty Johnson was there too, and she looked happier than Jake had seen her in weeks. I cannot believe how many people are supporting us, she said. I have been getting messages from strangers telling me to keep my rose garden. The third neighbor was Patricia Williams, who lived on the next street over. Jake had never talked to her before, but he knew she was on the HOA board with Carol. Mr. Martinez, Patricia said nervously, I need to talk to you about the video you posted. Jake wondered if Patricia was there to defend Carol. What about it? I had no idea Carol was treating residents this way, Patricia said. The other board members and I watched your video last night, and we are very concerned about what we saw. You should be concerned, Carlos said. Carol has been making up rules and harassing people for months. Patricia nodded. We are calling an emergency board meeting for tonight. Would you be willing to come and share what you have documented about Carol's behavior? Jake agreed to attend the meeting. Throughout the day, the video continued to spread online. By lunchtime, it had over 200,000 views. Local news stations started calling Jake's house, wanting to interview him about the HOA situation. Jake decided to talk to one news reporter, a woman named Susan Clark from Channel 7 News. She came to his house that afternoon with a camera crew. What made you decide to record this confrontation? Susan asked Jake. Carol Peterson has been harassing my family and other neighbors with fake rules for weeks, Jake explained. When I saw her screaming at an elderly widow about a memorial garden, I knew someone had to document what was really happening. Susan also interviewed Betty Johnson, who was nervous but determined to tell her story. "I thought I was going to have to destroy my husband's memorial garden because Carol told me it was against the rules. I was so stressed that I ended up in the hospital. Now I know she was lying to me the whole time." A news story aired that evening just before the emergency HOA board meeting. By then, Jake's video had been viewed over 500,000 times and had been picked up by national news websites. Jake arrived at the community center for the HOA meeting carrying a folder full of documentation. The room was packed with neighbors he had never seen before. Everyone wanted to see what would happen to Carol Peterson. Carol was sitting at the front table with the other board members, but she looked very different from her usual confident self. Her hair was messy, and she kept looking down at her hands instead of making eye contact with anyone. Patricia Williams called the meeting to order. "We are here tonight to address serious concerns about HOA enforcement practices," she announced. Jake was invited to speak first. He presented all of his documentation, showing how Carol had made up fake rules and selectively enforced real rules. He showed copies of violation notices for rules that did not exist. He played audio recordings of Carol, admitting that she treated some residents differently than others. "Carol Peterson has abused her position as HOA president," Jake concluded. "She has caused stress, fear, and financial hardship for multiple families in our neighborhood." Then other residents spoke up. Carlos Rivera talked about the basketball hoop harassment. Betty Johnson explained how Carol's threats about the memorial garden had affected her health. The Kim family described being fined for hanging laundry outside, while Carol's friends were allowed to do the same thing without any consequences. One by one, 12 different families shared stories of how Carol had bullied them with fake or unfairly enforced rules. Carol tried to defend herself. "I was just trying to maintain our neighborhood standards," she said weakly. "By lying about what the rules actually say?" asked board member Robert Davis. "By threatening elderly residents? By making children afraid to play in their own yards?" The board voted unanimously to remove Carol Peterson from her position as HOA president. They also voted to void all the fake violation notices she had issued and to refund the money that families had paid in illegal fines. But the consequences for Carol did not stop there. The viral video had brought attention to more than just her. Harassment of residents. Other board members began looking more closely at how Carol had been managing HOA finances. They discovered that Carol had been using HOA money to pay for her own landscaping service and pool maintenance. She had also been charging the HOA for expensive dinners that were supposedly board meetings. But the other board members had never been invited to these dinners. The board contacted the police about the financial irregularities. Within a week, Carol was charged with embezzlement and abuse of office. The local prosecutor said that Carol had stolen over $15,000 from the HOA fund over the past 2 years. The story continued to spread online. Jake's video was featured on national news programs and talked about on social media for weeks. People from around the world shared their own stories about dealing with difficult HOA officials. Jake was elected as the new HOA president in a special election held 1 month later. His first act was to simplify the HOA rules and create a clear process for residents to appeal any violations they received. "No one should have to live in fear of their HOA," Jake said in his acceptance speech. "Our job is to help make this neighborhood a better place for everyone, not to bully people with made-up rules." Carol Peterson eventually moved out of Maple Grove after her legal troubles became too much to handle. The neighborhood became much more peaceful without her constant harassment and threats. Betty Johnson kept her beautiful rose garden, and it became one of the most admired features in the entire neighborhood. Emma and Sophie Martinez learned to ride their bicycles in the driveway and later taught other children in the neighborhood how to ride. Jake's viral video became a symbol for standing up to bullies who abuse their power. People still share it online when they want to show that sometimes one person with courage and a smartphone can make a real difference. The video's final view count was over 2 million. But for Jake, the most important result was much simpler. His daughters could finally play in their own yard without being afraid.